What happens when a global superpower tries to quietly erase Africa's voice from the G20? They expected silence, but what they triggered was a continental uprising. From Pretoria to Ouagadougou, a new Pan-African alliance is rising, stronger, bolder, and more united than ever. India steps in, BRICS closes ranks, and Burkina Faso ignites a movement the West never saw coming. This isn't just politics, it is the rebirth of African power on the world stage. Stay tuned, because what happens next could change global geopolitics forever.
The sun over Ouagadougou glowed like a burning ember, casting long shadows across the capital as tensions rippled quietly through diplomatic corridors around the world. For months, whispers had spread across international intelligence networks. Burkina Faso was about to make a move unprecedented in its post-independence history. Not a military operation, not a political purge, but something far more symbolic. A realignment of powers so bold that even seasoned analysts struggled to imagine its full consequences. At the center of this unfolding drama was a small Sahelian nation long underestimated by global powers. For decades, Burkina Faso had been treated as a peripheral actor, a pawn on a board dominated by foreign interests. Yet, in the last year, it had risen to defy expectations, challenge long-standing global hierarchies, and take control of its security destiny. The decision that would shake the world began in a closed-door meeting inside the presidential compound, where generals, strategists, and diplomats gathered around a polished wooden table marked by decades of political storms. The air was tense. Maps of the Sahel lay spread out before the officials, crisscrossed with colored lines representing militant movements, smuggling corridors, and contested zones. Reports of attacks on northern villages had increased. Armed groups, emboldened by foreign supply lines and regional instability, had intensified their operations. The urgent need for advanced weapons and surveillance technology had become undeniable. Yet traditional Western partners, led by United States policymakers, had placed strict conditions on military cooperation, conditions that undermined national sovereignty and delayed defense procurement at critical moments. The generals had warned repeatedly that delaying armament was tantamount to surrender. Bureaucratic restrictions imposed by foreign allies placed the nation at the mercy of militants who did not operate by the rules of diplomacy. The situation was becoming untenable, and the leadership knew it. On this decisive day, the room fell silent as the foreign affairs advisor stepped forward with a sealed folder. "It is time," he said, placing the document before the president. "Our partners in Beijing are ready." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the statement lingered. China, an economic giant with global ambitions, had offered Burkina Faso what no Western nation had: modern weapons, surveillance drones, armored carriers, and a long-term military-industrial partnership without political strings. The offer included training exchanges, maintenance facilities, and technology-sharing programs. Most importantly, deliveries would begin within weeks, not years. The generals exchanged glances. They understood that this decision would send shockwaves far beyond Africa. Beijing's growing influence in the Sahel had already unsettled Western intelligence agencies. But this, a direct weapons deal, would ignite diplomatic firestorms. And still, the choice felt inevitable. The president slowly opened the folder, scanning the agreements. "We cannot defend our people with promises," he said. "We cannot secure our future under conditions written by others. If sovereignty requires boldness, then let this be the moment we choose it." Approval was immediate and unanimous. Burkina Faso would turn to China for weapons. But this was only the beginning. In Moscow, Burkinabe diplomats had been meeting quietly with strategists, technologists, and defense officials. The alliance with Russia had deepened significantly since the nation began reorienting its foreign policy. Russian advisors had already been helping train special units, assist in counterterrorism, and modernize command structures. But what happened next would elevate the partnership to a historic new level. A trilateral security corridor, a coordinated defense framework connecting Moscow, Beijing, and Ouagadougou, was being finalized. For the first time, a West African nation would operate on a platform integrating Chinese equipment with Russian tactical doctrine. The strategic implications were enormous. While Western powers insisted the partnership threatened regional stability, Burkinabe leadership argued the opposite. For the first time, They were free to design a defense strategy rooted in national interests rather than international pressure. The world began to take notice. In Washington, analysts pored over satellite images revealing new construction on military bases across Burkina Faso, elongated runways, reinforced bunkers, and cargo pads large enough for heavy equipment shipments. The intelligence reports reached senior officials within the Pentagon. Their reactions were swift and uneasy. A coordinated Chinese-Russian presence in the Sahel threatened long-standing Western influence in West Africa, a region historically seen as a strategic buffer zone. Diplomats attempted to intervene, scheduling meetings, sending envoys, and cautioning about unintended consequences. But the Burkinabe leadership had grown weary of warnings that came without solutions, assistance that came with conditions, and partnerships that demanded compliance rather than cooperation. This was no longer an era of dependency, it was an era of choice. As word spread across Africa, the move ignited inspiration in neighboring countries grappling with similar struggles. Commentators praised Burkina Faso's courage. Pan-African voices declared that sovereignty was no longer theoretical, it was being lived. Young people across the continent shared messages celebrating the nation's stand against foreign pressure. Meanwhile, inside Burkina Faso, preparations accelerated. Airfields were upgraded to accommodate heavy cargo aircraft. Engineers and mechanics were trained to handle new equipment. Special units drilled in the northern provinces, anticipating the arrival of the advanced weapons systems. And then, one night, just after 2 a.m., the first Chinese cargo aircraft descended over Ouagadougou's dark horizon. Its massive silhouette roared across the sky, touched down on the reinforced runway, and taxied to a floodlit hangar where dozens of soldiers and technicians were waiting. The cargo doors opened with a metallic groan. Inside were armored vehicles, tactical drones, communication systems, and crates marked with characters that glowed under the spotlight. The soldiers stood still, absorbing the gravity of the moment. This was history unfolding before their eyes. Within days, Russian advisors joined Burkinabe officers in strategic planning operations, integrating the new equipment into existing formations. The deployment was swift, organized, and shockingly efficient. And then, for the first time in years, the northern front began to shift. Militant camps that had once operated with impunity found themselves tracked by multispectral drones capable of night stalking. Convoys that had ambushed villages under cover of darkness now faced armored units equipped with impenetrable plating and electronic countermeasures. Communications nodes long exploited by insurgents were mapped, intercepted, and dismantled. The balance of power was changing, and militants knew it. But so did the world. In Brussels, think tanks scrambled to interpret what this meant for Western security strategy. In Paris, military advisors grew anxious about losing influence in a region they once considered within their strategic orbit. In Washington, congressional committees demanded briefings on the geopolitical consequences of Burkina Faso's pivot toward China and Russia. And in Africa, a new narrative began to unfold, one built on sovereignty, confidence, and strategic alignment directed by African nations, not imposed on them. Burkina Faso had not just secured weapons. It had secured leverage. The leadership knew that global reactions would intensify, but they were prepared. For the first time, the nation was building a foreign policy infrastructure that served its own security, its own people, and its own vision of the future. And the world, whether in approval or alarm, was now watching. The dust storms over Pretoria had barely settled when whispers of a continental realignment began echoing through diplomatic backchannels. What started as a quiet move by Washington to undermine South Africa's position in the global arena now threatened to awaken a force long underestimated: a unified, self-determined Africa. In Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union became the heartbeat of a rapidly mobilizing continent. Delegates from across Africa arrived in waves, some in crisp suits fresh from negotiation tables, others draped in traditional attire, symbolizing the ancestral mandate they carried. What united them was a single fire. Africa would not be bullied, not this time. At the center of the storm, Pretoria pulsed with intensity. South Africa's government, backed silently but firmly by BRICS, had begun assembling its own coalition, a counteroffensive not fought with weapons, but with alliances, financial instruments, and a narrative powerful enough to challenge the old order. India stepped forward first, breaking the hesitancy that had hung in the air. Its foreign ministry sent an encrypted message directly to Pretoria, bypassing all the usual international channels. If they push you out, we stand with you. Africa's rise is India's rise. At the same time, miles away in Ouagadougou, the revolutionary leadership of Burkina Faso sensed the shifting winds. Inspired by a vision of a liberated, sovereign continent, they proposed a radical diplomatic offensive, a Pan-African coalition inside the G20, not anchored by one state, but by Africa itself. The idea was bold, dangerous, and exactly what the moment demanded. Burkina Faso's envoys traveled from capital to capital, rallying leaders who had grown weary of foreign interference. They spoke not of revenge, but of reclamation, not of isolation, but of redefinition. The continent listened. Meanwhile, in Washington, analysts scrambled. Their plan to quietly challenge South Africa's seat in the G20 was unraveling. What was supposed to be a surgical geopolitical maneuver had ignited a firestorm, one that spread across continents faster than any intelligence assessment predicted. Reports revealed a deeper twist. Several European powers had quietly supported the move, hoping to weaken Africa's growing diplomatic assertiveness. But their involvement only hardened Africa's resolve. And then came the moment that shocked the world. At an emergency summit in Addis Ababa, attended by every African head of state, a unified declaration was announced. Africa will not be sidelined. Africa will not be spoken for. Africa will shape its destiny, with or without Western approval. The declaration was broadcast live. Streets across Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Dakar, Accra, Bamako erupted with celebration. For the first time in decades, ordinary Africans felt the pulse of a continent standing tall. But the West was not done. Behind closed doors, counter-strategies were drafted, lobbyists mobilized, media narratives were recalibrated. Pressure intensified on countries seen as too aligned with South Africa. Yet Africa had already crossed a threshold, a psychological and political awakening far more powerful than any sanction or smear campaign. Russia signaled its support, calling Africa the new pillar of global multipolarity. China followed with diplomatic assurances. India doubled down. The BRICS alliance strengthened, forming a shield around South Africa's contested G20 seat. But the true surprise came from within Africa itself. The rise of a new leadership class, young, assertive, unbought, and unapologetically Pan-African. A generation that refused to inherit the diplomatic shackles of the past. The struggle had only just begun. But one truth became clear. Africa was no longer reacting to global politics. Africa was beginning to shape it. And the world, willingly or not, would have to adjust.